Well, I mean, I'm always watching President Donald Trump. He lives in my head rent-free, and I think that's probably true of a lot of people. And then, of course, Putin. I'm watching Putin, Zelensky, and that nexus. It's interesting that I'm not really watching Xi Jinping at the moment, which I know.
Should you be? I mean, we saw those exercises the last few days.
Yeah.
It's really popping off again, if you like. I mean, is he just prodding the Japanese and the US, or is he actually working on a plan?
Well, I think he's biding his time. And someone like me, who's always very excitable about the downside, and I could list all the times I've got that wrong, I'm always watching China for its potential invasion of Taiwan. And it does seem this year, and in the last few years, that doesn't seem as imminent as you'd think. Now, you're right to point out that there's visual data and there's military data that would suggest otherwise. But I think that's probably part of a strategy, as you suggest, to ratchet up the pressure and remind Japan and remind the United States that China has this newfound ability. It doesn't necessarily mean that if it deploys its forces, it will employ them. So my conclusion after a while is that I've probably been a bit hysterical about the China-Taiwan issue.
Well, no, but there is a deadline on it, right? I mean, Xi Jinping wants this done at the back end of a 10-year plan. But yeah, continue, Carol.
No, you continue.
Well, again, for me, I thought for a few years that it was imminent. I mean, I've said this before. The reason I think it isn't is that China understands that you can't just float a force over the 120 miles to the west coast of Taiwan without also confronting the Americans. So it's harder than they think, I think.
Ed, who do you think fears President Trump? Who do you really think considers he and the United States still an ally?
Well, on the first one, who fears him? Vulnerable members of our labour market, possibly Spanish-speaking, people who are here in good faith, working hard to create the GDP that we need to confront China or Russia. Mm-hmm. That's a bad thing, right? If your labour market is shrinking and afraid in a geopolitical confrontation. And the second part of your question is, I think, who respects him?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I'm exhaling. I don't know that he's respected.
Because listen, we talk about your relationships that you've had, certainly in the UK and with European officials. I'm assuming you still have confidants and folks that you talk to. Mm-hmm. I mean, do they fear him? Do they respect him? Do they consider him, certainly members of NATO, still an ally?
Well, I can't speak for NATO. I mean, I was in the economic side of government.
Fair.
But yes, rendering them anonymous, friends of mine who are still serving in various parts of the world do not respect President Donald Trump. And they don't respect him for one reason, which is that whereas Nixon presented a very effective madman routine, Donald Trump doesn't actually stick to his guns. And if you go through his record, I mean, I was talking in the green room about Liberation Day. Mm-hmm. Every single time he's said, thus far and no further, or this will happen, if X happens, Y will happen, it hasn't really. So I think that people have now sort of realized that there's no incentive with him to do as he asks necessarily, because he doesn't follow through.
Well, so is it so that the bark is worse than the bite, ultimately, for President Trump? I mean,
yeah.
Right at times, Vonnie, we've certainly felt the bite, Liberation Day and markets. Investors believed it.
He struck Iran.
Yeah.
He struck Iran, but I mean, I've put it like this before. Teddy Roosevelt famously said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." Yeah. And it seems that President Trump, with as much respect as I can muster, speaks incoherently and sort of occasionally carries a stick. And you can't infer as a rival power or an adversary or even an ally exactly what his behaviors are going to be.
Right, but that's what makes it so terrifying, especially if you're a Venezuela and, there's so many warships and carriers and troops basically stationed off your coast. What's going to happen with Venezuela, Ed?
Whatever we do, we are damaging our power. Whatever we do in showing hard power in the way that we are and moving away from soft power, we are reducing the overall power of the United States. That's because the hard power of the United States is in part based on our soft power. People like us, they trust us, they lend us money, and we debt finance a military. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen in Venezuela. I imagine there's going to be more extrajudicial killings. But at some point, that is going to seep into the market for US debt. And at some point, people are going to notice in the next decade.
Why has it not so far? I mean, for a president who said we're not getting involved internationally in any international wars, we're, in Russia, Ukraine, we're not in Taiwan yet, but maybe we would be, Nigeria, Venezuela. I mean, where else? There's so many going on.
Well, in striking people from the air, that's the Obama playbook. So I think there's some continuity there with President Trump. He hasn't put boots on the ground, so that would be the marker for a real sea change in his policy if he put boots on the ground in Venezuela. But back to the point on treasuries, I mean, I think that the dollar is on a structural course to some form of run on the dollar, some form of massive correction this century, perhaps even in the next quarter century, and that is going to be very difficult for economic policymakers to deal with.
Is that why we've seen gold go up? Like, what's your take on the gold trade? Or do you have one?
Well, I think as the dollar smile potentially weakens, it won't completely go away, but it will fade.
Yeah.
People are going to want what they consider to be safer assets. I think that's gold. I think that's been Bitcoin, even though, of course, Bitcoin has speculation attached to it. But what I really scratch my head about is if there was a new thesis that emerged, that there were too many dollars in existence per se, what exactly would the economic policy response be? It couldn't be the response that we saw in the 2008 crisis, which was quantitative easing.
Yeah.
It would have to be some sort of second Volcker shock. And that would be disastrous. So I don't know why the Treasury market isn't more illiquid. I would have expected it to be. But that is the trend I would foresee.
What's the biggest risk to the world? Is it there's a big risk to the world, there's a big risk to the United States. Take whichever one you want.
The United States right now is the biggest risk to the world,
Yeah.
as expressed in the world that the United States built. And the United States has become the first country, so far as I can see in history, to voluntarily dismantle its empire and to voluntarily annoy its own allies.
Can I ask you something? I worked with someone from the UK, and she said, you have a young country. Mm-hmm. This kind of stuff's going to happen. Talk to me about the history of the United Kingdom and how it has changed. So how does this moment in time, we've only got about 45 seconds or a minute left here, how do you think possibly this moment in time fits into U.S. history?
Well, the United States has always had a decision between a system of government based on Locke, which is essentially consent, and this is something, the ideas that Jefferson copied, or Hobbes. And the bigger that America has got, the more that you've seen some American characters in history say, hold on, the president should be stronger and stronger. He should become the Leviathan that Hobbes writes about. And this is what the Trumpian moment is. Are we going to continue down a consensus-based model of governance, or are we in fact going to see a much, much stronger executive emerge?